Hello everyone, welcome to the Amazing Race recap. I know I haven't posted a video in a while, but in this one I have a lot of content to discuss as I review some of the older seasons of the race. I started with reviewing seasons 1 and 2. I think I posted some of those here, but now I'm deciding to kind of compile seasons into one video. So this video will be seasons 1 through 11 of The Amazing Race, the original seasons, the start of it all, with some of the most iconic characters in race history. Of course, we have season 37, the newest season, which will be premiering very soon, just at the start of March, and I will do some posts on my Instagram there, and you'll just be able to see kind of the weekly look at that, and then eventually there will be a review on that one as part of one of these block videos with a lot of the seasons. So, season 1 to 11, I'm doing it based on when where the All Stars falls in, and I am including that. So we're just gonna start off with what started it all. Season 1 of the race, starting off in New York at the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park, and great place to start the race, and a really solid season to start it. Just looking at it overall, we had some really great teams in this one. There were a few odd quirks in this season because it was the first. In general, it was edited more like a documentary than a reality TV show. It didn't really have a lot of the drama that some other seasons have, and was edited in more of a travel documentary type than a game reality show. So that was definitely an interesting part of it, but I think the teams brought enough energy to compensate for that. Let's look at the route here, where we started in New York, and then we had some really cool sights on this route. They went to the Eiffel Tower. I can remember that vividly, and I thought that was really cool. Tunisia was pretty cool. South Africa, a lot of fun. That's where they went after New York. Italy, India, Thailand, China, and Alaska. So a pretty solid route, not amazing, but pretty solid, and I really like some of the sites that they visited, like the Eiffel Tower. And another odd quirk of the season is that Phil was not at the mat unless the team was going to be eliminated. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I definitely stand with the race's decision to add in Phil in the next seasons, because it's really enjoyable to get to see Phil be more involved. But I just thought that was an interesting part of the season. Not too bad, but I definitely prefer Phil being there for all of the teams. So I'm just going to go down the boot order now, starting with the first team eliminated in the race history, Matt and Anna. They fall into what I'm calling the troubled couple archetype, where they fight against each other a little bit. For the first team out, they really weren't that boring. They had a little bit of fighting going on, and I thought that as far as first boots go, they weren't that forgettable or irrelevant. And then in 10th, we had the friends, Kim and Leslie. To be honest, I forgot about them a lot. I just think some of these teams got caught up early on in the more documentary type editing of this show and became forgettable. So don't remember too much of them. They're kind of just like middle of the road. Don't remember them. And then in ninth, we had Pat and Brenda. Similar there. I remember that they were a little bit older, more of an underdog team, but I just can't remember specifically too much of what they did. Um, then in eighth place, we had one of the older couples in the race, Dave and Margareta, and they didn't do too much themselves. They weren't, necessarily one of the most enjoyable older teams to watch, but I will say they kind of set a precedent in the future for some older teams. They created the archetype. So some of these teams, even if they're not that big as far as the race goes and the history of it, they are creating the archetype, and that is an important role to play in the race because so many teams fall under the same archetype when you look at all the seasons. And then seventh, this is where we start getting to some good teams. Paul and Amy, another troubled couple. They had some really fun fights on here. I found them enjoyable to watch. I know that some of these troubled couples can be quite controversial. Some people like them, some people hate them. I think that depending on the type of bickering, they can be very fun to watch. And Paul and Amy were a pretty enjoyable troubled couple, eliminated seventh. Same thing for Lenny and Karen. They had a very interesting dynamic. Karen was the controlling female, and she was like really controlling in the relationship. She did some crazy yelling that I remember her for. And overall, I thought they were a pretty interesting team for that dynamic. And another good troubled couple. So quite a few of these archetype in season one, and a good start to the archetype. And then fifth place eliminated Nancy and Emily, fantastic parent and child underdog team, setting another precedent there, and just someone that you can easily cheer for. They were in the drama enough, between going against the Guidos and trying to beat them and that kind of stuff. They were a pretty large part of the season and an easy team to cheer for, so they were also a great team. And then in fourth place, we have a fantastic team, my personal favorite of the season, Drew and Kevin, the New Yorkers. They had so many hilarious quotes and just were a lot of fun to watch. Really enjoyed them. Um, Played a decent role in this season. They weren't like the main characters of this season, but they were just really funny to watch going around the world, and my personal favorite team. Then in third place, a team that fell completely behind based on some poor decisions and leading into the final leg was the Guidos, Bill and Joe. They kind of served as the villains for this season, between the whole pushing and shoving incident at the airport. I think it was really great that we got drama like that in season one, and pretty cool considering how early everything was that we had those type of iconic moments so early on. Enjoy them as villains. I think, in my opinion, I would rather have a season with a little tension and a clear storyline than a kind of feel good season without a clear storyline. And I think they provided that very well. So, an iconic team and one of the highest rated teams in this season for me. Second place, we have another troubled couple, my favorite one of the season, Frank and Margarita. They're pretty enjoyable to watch, and maybe that's in part because they survived the longest of all the troubled teams, but I found them an enjoyable team to watch. And then the winners of the season, setting another precedent, an all male team, Brennan and Rob. They didn't do that much. They weren't interesting to watch. They just, I can't say too many good things about them because they just weren't exciting to watch, but they weren't necessarily controversial, so that's the only thing that saved them. They did play like a major role in like the racing and that kind of stuff, obviously, since they won, but they set a precedent of the winning team being unsatisfying to viewers and kind of boring to watch. So overall, cast was actually quite good. And looking at some of the criteria I look at for every season, I look at the route, which was pretty good as I mentioned. Cast, great. And then boot order. This is basically just saying the teams that get voted that get eliminated early on, um, are they going to be less interesting than the ones that are? It should be like a upward sloping line from the less interesting teams to the more interesting teams throughout the season. And then you have the story, and this season, as I mentioned already, had a great storyline with some troubled relationships as well as some villainous acts. And so overall, I give it an 8 out of 10. It's got a few quirks and it's not perfect. In some places, it might even be boring, but I found this season pretty interesting. Favorite three teams: the New Yorkers, the Guidos, and Frank and Margarita from this season. So quite a good start to the race. Let's move on to season two, which obviously now fills at the mat for everyone, and kind of fixed some of the quirks. It's definitely becoming more defined as far as how the race is working at this point. Just going over the route real quick. I don't have the countries in order, but you know, in the U.S. they went to Nevada, Alaska, California, Hawaii, so some good states there. And then we got Brazil, South Africa, Namibia, Thailand, Hong Kong, New Zealand. So some good countries. They're not a ton of like exotic countries, but some good countries for sure. A pretty good route. A little bit better than season one, in my opinion. And just going down the boot order once again. 11th place, we had Deidre and Hillary. Parent child team eliminated early. Didn't get to learn too much about them. 10th, we had Hope and Norm. They were like this kind of southern couple. Again, kind of a boring team that we just didn't get to see that much of, and kind of irrelevant. And then eighth, we had Shola and Doreen, the siblings. Once again, they weren't too interesting. They seemed like athletic, but they never played that big of a role in the race. And sorry, I skipped over the gutsy grannies, Peggy and Claire, one of the better early boots in race history, just with that nickname and just being this older friend couple. They really were fun to watch. They were an underdog team that didn't make it that far, but I enjoyed them for when they were in the race. And then, so I'd already talked about Shola and Doreen, so moving over to seventh place, Cindy and Russell. They were kind of like preacher to religious couple, and I found them to be pretty uninteresting. I just don't think they added that much to the race. So far, not that great of teams. Sixth place, we do get better though with Mary and Peach, friends, and I found them to be really fun to watch, and they were definitely a part of the race between like the bickering and that kind of stuff. They were fun to watch. And then in fifth place, we had one of my favorite teams from this season, Gary and Dave, the Jokesters. They were really fun to watch. They had a lot of good lines. One of my favorite moments in the entire history of the race is the Gary and Dave confessionals, is what I call it, where they're talking about bad about Mary and Peach and everyone else. I just found it to be absolutely hilarious, and they're definitely one of the funniest teams in the race. Fourth, another hilarious team, Oswald and Danny. They were just so funny, and I love how they go shopping in the middle of the leg. Just some really good stuff happening there. I also found it funny how the Guidos kind of did that last season, and that cursed them, and then they're doing it again this season. So they were a fantastic team, tied for favor of this season for me. In third place, we had siblings, Blake and Paige. You could definitely cheer for them. They were younger, and they just seemed like a feel-good team, but not that interesting. So not too high on my list for this season. And then second place, what this season it's essentially all about. Tara and Will, a troubled couple, perhaps the most bickering troubled couple of the race. That's definitely up for debate, but they just really lashed at each other and hated each other, and it was fun to watch. And between that and Tara getting together with, I think, Alex from Chris and Alex, just so many good moments there. And Chris and Alex, the winners of this season, they were fine. With the relationship, that definitely boosted them a little bit, and they made some jokes. Not my favorite team ever to win it, for sure, but a little bit better than Brennan and Rob, and they at least had some role in the season. And of course, this season also known for its fantastic finish with a foot race at the end. So cool, so rare to get that kind of stuff. So my favorite three for this season: Tara and Will, Oswald and Danny and Gary and Dave. Just some great humor and entertainment in this season. Pretty good story, not that well defined, but pretty good story for this one. And boot order was pretty good as well. We had some good teams at the end. The winning team wasn't the most satisfying result, but it was a great season. 8 out of 10 for season 2 as well. And then we move on to season 3. Um, just having a quick look at the route. Pretty good route, including some countries like Mexico, Portugal, England, Scotland, Spain, Morocco, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, that kind of stuff. So some good locations to visit. Not the best route of all time, but I think it continues to improve on 1 and 2. So once again, I'm just going to go down the boot order. First team out, the Soccer Moms. They definitely seem like they could have been interesting if they made it in longer, but they were eliminated in the first leg. So maybe a bit of a disappointing early boot there, but they seemed like they could have been interesting. And then 11th, we had Tramiel and Talisha, some siblings. They were fun. They seemed like they could have been definitely more fun if they made it in longer, but we didn't get to see too much from them. 10th, we had a parent-child team in Dennis and Andrew, and this kind of starts a bit of a trope that continues throughout the seasons where you have like, um, the son or the daughter trying to gain approval from their parent. That definitely comes up a lot, and we did get to see that a little bit from them, but we didn't get to see too much of them. Ninth, Heather and Eve, they kind of serve as the flirt archetype, and they had some funny moments with like penalties and that kind of stuff. Despite having like a Harvard education, I think so. There were some good moments with them. Eighth place, we had Michael and Kathy. Troubled couple, didn't bicker too crazy, and just not too memorable, so not that high on my list. Seventh place, Aaron and Ariane, friends. They had a few witty comments and were definitely involved in the drama regarding the twin hunt and all that kind of alliance work that really plays a very major role in this season. But not my favorite team ever, but they did have a effect on this season. And then sixth place, Andre and Damon, male friends and uh, first responders, and they were kind of boring in general, and just can't remember too much about them. And they made it a long way too, so just not that interesting of a team, in my opinion. And then we're moving down the list. We have the fifth place team, John Vito and Jill. They kind of serve as the friendly couple, kind of another feel good team, but not that interesting to watch necessarily. They were definitely involved in the dynamics of the race, but they didn't play a major role to the audience, in my opinion. And in fourth place, we have one of the biggest impact teams of the season, Derek and Drew, the twins, athletic models, and they, the whole season was about the twin hunt and the alliances against them and with them, and they definitely played a major role. As for their personalities, they're kind of a basic all male team. They didn't interest me that much, but their role in the season definitely boosts them in my book. And then this season, like so far, we have not had any fantastic teams as I've gone down the list, but the final three is the best final three in my opinion in the entire race. The final three is the three best teams in the season, and arguably in that order too. Third place, Ken and Gerard, siblings, brothers, and just jokesters. So many good lines from them. Really funny team. Kind of like some of those teams I mentioned in season 2. So they were just really fantastic. Terry and Ian, one of the older couples. They're not that old. They're in their 50s. They look older. I mean, they definitely did when they raced. But they are one of my favorite teams. Hump It Terry. Oh, iconic stuff from them. so good. They kind of served as villains in parts, but they're also underdogs, so a dynamic team. They got second place and a really good team. My second favorite in the season. Flo and Zach just took up the winners of the season. Took up such a large part of the screen time. Had some Flo had some really crazy breakdowns. They definitely rival Tara and Wills, perhaps more than them even, and just a lot of bickering. Flo was definitely just breaking down, and Zach seemed like a pretty nice guy that just had to deal with her, so it was a pretty good dynamic. The crazy thing is that they won. These teams, sometimes these troubled teams get far, but it seems like they rarely ever win. But they won. It provides for a pretty interesting winning team. They were my favorite team of the season, at least as far as pure entertainment goes, because they provided the most and they won. So just an interesting outcome there. Fantastic final three. Three teams that I would consider icons in the race. And yeah, so those are my favorite three teams of the season. I give this one a 9 out of 10. The main downside to this season was just that all those earlier teams outside the final three, no icons in there, and just not some of my favorite teams in general. If a few of those teams were better, this season could be in contention in my mind for the best season, but it still is a top tier season in my opinion. So then after the fantastic third season, season 4, a bit of a letdown, but not as bad as some people think it was. Route was pretty pedestrian. I mean, just looking in random order, some of these countries: Italy, France, Australia, India, Netherlands, Malaysia, um, South Korea, Austria. So, kind of just standard countries that they visit so many times. Nothing too interesting or memorable from the route. And yeah, I just don't remember the route enough to consider it good. It's honestly probably the worst route this far because of that. So I'm just going to go down the boot order once again. The first team out was Deborah and Steve, older couple, not that old, but they were kind of an underdog, married parents team, eliminated early on, just not athletic enough to keep up. I'll just move on from them. Amanda and Chris, troubled couple, don't really remember them at all. Minor role in the race. Same thing with Cindy and Russell, 10th place. Can't remember much about them. I just rank them right at that kind of tier where they're just not doing much for me. Ninth, another parent-child team, Steve and Josh. Um, Kind of the same. I think they like won some legs and had a role in the racing, but just not interesting to watch. Eighth place though, pretty early boot. We have a really good team. So I rank all my teams from one on a scale of 130, based on what I think of their personality and how they contribute to the race as well. And breaking 100 means you're a pretty good team. Breaking 110, you're one of the most iconic teams of all time. And then, like 50s would be kind of those teams that just don't do anything for me. And Steve and Dave, the air traffic controllers, um, eighth place. They get a score of 102 for me. I just found them pretty funny and a good underdog team, and a fun part of the early part of this season. Then we have seventh place, Monica and Cherie, moms and friends. They didn't do too much for me either. Um, Sixth place, Tian and Jeree, friends, and they had some bickering moments and some energy, so they were a break 100 team for me as well. If they made it a little farther this season, could definitely have done better, but they were pretty interesting to watch when they're in there. Fifth place, Millie and Chuck. They were interesting, but mainly because of how much they were bullied by John and Kelly. That's really the main storyline this season. It's just John and Kelly being the villains, the bullies. and kind of some of the alliance work in between that. So they were definitely a part of that storyline. And this season might be the best, but at least it had that storyline because so many others don't have enough of a storyline. Fourth place, John and Al, the Clowns. Strong male team, which they can be boring. They were not boring. They were clowns, so they were joking around a lot. But I found them not to be as iconic as some of those other jokester teams like Gary and Dave and Danny and Ozzy and two I think of, and the New Yorkers. They just didn't bring that energy to me, so they definitely fall short in that regard. Third place, we have a pretty boring team, David and Jeff, the Bachelors. They just were like an athletic male team. Can't remember much about them at all. Like they made a long way and were obviously a very strong team, but just didn't bring much as far as personality to the game. Second place, John and Kelly, a troubled couple. They fought, and they also were the villains of the season. I really do like a season to have a villain. I think it gives a built-in storyline and some funny moments, such as John stripping down naked on the beach in the final leg. That was pretty memorable. And yeah, they were definitely my favorite team this season. They were funny, they were entertaining to watch. And then the winners of this season, Riken and Chip, they were fine. They were a part of the some of the alliance and those dynamics for sure, which is good, but they just didn't definitely were an iconic team in my book. So season 4, a bit of a letdown, but not too bad since it does have that storyline. It gets a 6 out of 10 from me, but it's sandwiched in between some of the best seasons of all time. Season 5, here we go. Let's look at the route. We have so many good countries in here: Uruguay, um, Argentina, Russia, Egypt, Kenya, Tanzania, UAE, India, New Zealand, and the Philippines. So many exotic countries, and so many great landmarks visited. Like, I just think of how they were doing challenges right next to the pyramids. So cool, such a good backdrop for all of the tension in the race. And then they go to the Philippines and do some awesome um, viewed there as well. So just a really good route. Probably the best route just because of those iconic landmarks and the really cool landscapes that they visited. So in 11th place, Dennis and Erica, bit of a troubled couple, at least that's how they were billed in the start of the race. Not memorable at all, though. I'm just going to skip right past them. 10th, we had a troubled couple that appeared to be maybe a force in the race to a strong team, but they got eliminated in 10th. Had some trouble in Argentina. Some good fights from them with like the walking the dogs and all that kind of stuff in Argentina in the little bit of time they were there. So for a 10th place team, they were pretty high up in the rankings. And then ninth, we had Jim and Marsha, parent-child team, and they're mainly remembered for Jim, who like cut his foot open right at the start of the season, and I think that's a pretty good metaphor for how this season was gonna go with that at the start. Just so much action like that. So that's mainly what they're remembered for. They were fine. Definitely an underdog team that you wanted to cheer for. And then another team like that, Bob and Joyce, an older couple, but an internet dating couple. And, they kind of just fell behind with the business class flight to Russia and never recovered. They seem nice, but not necessarily one of the more energetic older teams. So that's kind of the first 4 out. Fine teams, I'm not going to complain, but the final 7 it has to be the best final 7 in any season, and there's not a single uninteresting team in the final 7, and there are so many teams that are iconic in the final 7. The seventh team, Lance and Marshall, another New Yorker team, and they were pretty enjoyable to watch. They had some tension, I just go back to all these seasons with the tension between them and Charla and Mirna and all that kind of stuff. So much tension just in even just with a seventh place team. It's so good, so fun to watch. And they did have to kind of give up there in Egypt and be eliminated, but a pretty entertaining team. And then sixth place, such a good team. Charla and Mirna and Shmirna, whatever you want to call them. They are so good. So fun to watch. And go to between all the airport drama and Mirna's always trying to work her way into something. And then, Charlotte getting electrocuted in Argentina or wherever that was. So, so good. So much chaos with them. Bit of a rivalry between them and Colin Christie. They were really, really good in this season. And yeah, I really enjoyed them. Such a good team. And tied for favorite for me for this season, even though they were eliminated in sixth place. So just an incredible team. They're kind of underdogs, because of Charlotte's height, but they're also villains. They're just such a dynamic team and really love them so much. And then in fifth place, Kim and Carly, the twins, the blondes. They were definitely a good example of that archetype and one of the more enjoyable examples of that archetype, and were a pretty big part of the race and just fun to watch. Then moving into fourth place, Karen and Linda, the iconic bowling moms. So good, so easy to cheer for. Uh, in the end, they weren't physical enough to make the final three, but they were a really strong underdog team, and just such a feel good team, and a really good team on the season. Third place, Brandon and Nicole. Troubled couple. They had some interesting fights and that kind of stuff. Not my favorite team ever, but still a major part of this season. And yeah, I definitely did enjoy what they brought to the table there. Second place, tied for favorite team of the season, Colin and Christie. What an incredible team. A troubled couple, but more importantly, one of the biggest role villain teams of all time. Just such a good team to see there. And they just really brought it with the oxygens broken, Colin throwing the fit of the taxi driver about to get arrested, and all kinds of crazy stuff they did. So many incredible moments in this season with them, and they almost pulled off the win by trying to get their taxi driver to go on the shoulders of the roads in Texas to try and get there. So, such a good team and just an absolute iconic team there. And then the winners, satisfying winner team for this season in my book, Chip and Kim. They're kind of the friendly couple, but they were a strong team, and there's definitely some fighting. Like Chip fought with Colin and everyone else too. So just so the inter team dynamics were so good. Um, and they were definitely one of the more satisfying winner teams, being kind of a feel good team, but also an entertaining team that was part of the drama. So, season 5, amazing. My favorite teams um, were Colin Christie, Mirna and Shmirna, and then the Bowling Moms. Just everything about the season. The boot order was fantastic, as I talked about. The route was so good. The cast was so good. The storyline was definitely there. And then even go to the challenges between the caviar and the ostrich eggs, all kinds of stuff. Just so good. And it almost like doesn't even give any other seasons a chance. I'm gonna say if you watch the race, save 5 for last. Like build it up to there because it's just such a good season, and it's just got everything. Like it can't be beat. It is that good of a season. Moving on to season 6, a bit of a letdown season. One, probably, I'm going to say the most controversial season out there. And I'll explain why in a minute. I'm just going to go through the countries. It's a good route. We get Sweden, we get Iceland, Norway, some great Scandinavian countries there. We get Germany, we go to Africa, to Senegal, to Ethiopia. Then we get Hungary, France, Sri Lanka, and China. So a good route, really solid route. Probably the second best of the first six. So really good route there. Some good challenges as well. I think of the soup challenge, was really good. And so great route. And I'm just gonna go through the teams now. First team out, 11th, Avi and Joe. They were the jokester archetype and could have been, I think, a really fun team, maybe even iconic if they survived longer. And it seemed like they were gonna potentially be a good team, but they were eliminated first. So a pretty good first boot there. In 10th place, Meredith and Maria, friends, forgettable, can't remember much about them. Ninth place, Lena and Christy. What we know about them is the hay bale challenge that just took forever into the night. They were eliminated by Phil out there. You can always remember the team getting eliminated when Phil has to go out there and eliminate them. So they worked really hard and just had the luck against them. So that's really what they're known for. Other than that, didn't really get to see anything too interesting with them. Eighth place, a really great older couple team, Don and Mary Jean. I think they were the oldest ever to do it. A sweet older couple, fun to watch. Didn't make it that far, so they're not going to be that highly rated, but they were definitely a fun team to watch. And then Gus and Hera, parent-child team, they were also an endearing team that was easy to cheer for. Moving on to sixth place, one of the most controversial teams in race history, Jonathan and Victoria. My thoughts on them. So my thoughts, it's that Jonathan was the biggest character in the entire history of the Amazing Race. I'm going to call it right there. Obviously, you have crazy people like Colin, but I think that Jonathan was just, he was off the walls crazy. He was on crack or something because he was just screaming everywhere, screaming in Victoria's face, and just, they bickered a lot. He was obviously not a good person, and you know, I can't rate them too highly because of that, but I also have to say that his outbursts were just absolutely hilarious, and I think I want to go watch some of those again because they definitely brought some energy into this season. I call this season the Babe season because you hear Babe about 500 times because we have so many couples. Um, Let me double check if this is right. Yeah, the entire final six, it's just couples. That is just absolutely ridiculous. So over half of the teams are couples, and the entire final six is just couples. That's probably a weak point for this season, but it also definitely creates some of that drama, really brings it in. Fifth place, Lori and Bolo, the wrestlers. They were interesting. They had some funny lines, a different type of team being wrestlers, and just, yeah, another interesting couple there. Some crazy teams this season. Fourth place, Hayden and Aaron, troubled couple. I think they were one of the teams that proposed on the race. Main thing I remember about them is just Hayden just going crazy in China, and there are some really funny moments there. So a high-rated team. They won. They were one of the better teams of the season. Didn't quite make it to the final three. Third is probably my favorite team of this season, Adam and Rebecca. A lot of funny quotes from them. Another troubled couple. We have 5 troubled couples this season, which is quite crazy. That it's a ton, and they were enjoyable to watch, funny, but they also fought, and they had a lot of great moments. They my favorite team of this season. Second place, John and Chris, the odd, nice couple of this season. They were kind of the feel-good team, but not anyone you wanted to cheer for that much. They weren't an underdog team. and just not that interesting of a team. They did make it all the way to second, but just not interesting of a team. And then we have one of the most divisive teams, and just controversial and negative in general of all time. Freddie and Kendra, and they ended up winning. There was some controversy. I think of how Freddie pushed some of the whole drama of, like, I think he was like pushed by other teams at a gate somewhere. I can't remember the exact situation, but I remember roughly what happened. And then I think of Kendra saying some bad things about the African countries and all that kind of stuff in Senegal. Um, so that was definitely interesting. Definitely not a team that you wanted to win. The lowest rated team of the season for those reasons. Definitely the Villains, another troubled couple as well. And yeah, so interesting season. It's kind of like the odd season out in many ways. Um, just so many couples and, you know, interesting story with some villain aspects, but a lot of intra team going on. So I give it a 7 out of 10. It's got some good. It's entertaining. It would definitely entertain you, but it's not necessarily feel good, or you know, it's just some of those teams that you want to cheer for, like Gus and Hera, Don and Mary Jean were eliminated earlier in the race. So then we kind of have this pattern, if you haven't noticed, where we have one of the best seasons of all time, and then an S season. So from 3 to 4, then 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and now 6 to 7. We have 7, such a good season. Route was quite good. We go to Peru, Chile, South Africa, Argentina, Botswana, India, Turkey, England, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, among other countries. And just going down the order of the teams, Ryan and Chuck were a Southerner team. They were kind of like the Hillbillies, and they could have been a really good team if they made it farther, but they were eliminated first. So sometimes that just happens where a team that may have been interesting is eliminated first, and I just put them down as slightly better than average when that happens. 10th place, Megan and Heidi. All they really did is flirted with the brothers, Brian and Greg. Other than that, they were really featureless, so that's all I'm going to say about them. 9th place, Debbie and Bianca. Kind of a similar type of team, more blondes, and, can't remember them too much, but they did make it in a bit farther to the race. 8th place, Susan and Patrick. Definitely played a pretty major role in some of the alliances and that kind of part of the season early on. So they definitely get some points from that. Not too interesting, and show some perhaps annoying tendencies that make them so you don't want to cheer for them, but they did go out pretty early. 7th place team, Dina and Dre. Troubled couple. Dina definitely got yelled at bad by Ray. He was definitely abusive, and of course that's not great, but they're entertaining to watch. I mean, I'm not gonna deny that fact. And they were a pretty entertaining team, eliminated in 7th. They couldn't keep up with Meredith and Gretchen, so yeah, that's how they got eliminated. And then 6th, we had Brian and Greg, siblings, jokesters. They flipped their car. They did all kinds of crazy stuff. Definitely kind of did some jokes with the other teams, which I always like when teams do that. So a pretty enjoyable team. Not an iconic one, but a pretty enjoyable team. Lynn and Alex, a male couple, and they're really just known for absolutely hating Rob and Amber, just going head to head against them, making everything about them. And I just found that to be pretty interesting. And that's the main part of their team. So they were a fine team. They weren't iconic. And then we have the Final Four. Fantastic Final Four. All iconic teams. In 4th place, Meredith and Gretchen. Um, an older couple. They're in their 60s. So as far as the older couples in the race go, they were one of the older. And I have to say it, they maybe weren't my favorite, the best team of the season as far as entertainment value goes, but they might be my favorite team of all time. They were just so great to watch, being underdog older couple that made it so far into the race and with some of the most competitive teams on race history. Just so many iconic moments, Gretchen getting her head bashed open, the bad elephant, and her riding on top in India. So many good moments throughout the season with them. Really, really fantastic team there. Third place, Ron and Kelly, troubled couple, made it pretty far. Good team. They're kind of just, a trouble couple. Not quite as interesting as some of the other ones that we've had, but still a good team that's entertaining to watch. Second place, Rob and Amber, the villains of the season. Boston Rob, so good. The strategy with the meat roadblock in Argentina, the strategy that's played, just such a big villain role, just like Colin and Christy in season 5. Such a good team. You definitely want to root against them, but they have such a major role in the race, and they are my highest rated team of this season. And then the winner, a really good winning team with Uchenna and Joyce. They're up there with Flo and Zach as far as the highest rated winning team goes. Because, Joyce had to get her head shaved, and that was just such a crazy thing you had to do during the race. They had that clear story arc, which is so great to have, and they're entertaining racers as well. So, really, really good season in season 7. I give it a 9 out of 10, just below season 5. Some of the earlier boots in this season just were quite as interesting as season 5's, middle of the pack. So I give the edge to season 5 over season 7, but they have many similarities and are both fantastic seasons. Moving on to the controversial family edition. I'm not going to talk about it too much. I'm not going to even talk about the route. Basically, we're just kind of going through some states in the U.S. We go to Panama and Costa Rica, and it's nice to get out of the country when we went there. But route was, geared for family, geared for kids. So the tasks weren't good and the route wasn't that good. So I'm not even going to talk about it that much. The main positive of this season was the story, a very clearly defined story, and as we go through all the teams, I will talk about that a little closer. First team out were the Blacks, an underdog family with some kids. Um, didn't get to learn too much about them, and could have maybe been interesting, but definitely weren't competitive enough to stay in it. First team out, a little awkward with the kids being eliminated. I've heard some people say that, but they're the first team out. And then 9-3 the Rogers. Honestly, don't remember them at all. When you have 40 people racing, some of these teams are just so forgettable. Like, I don't remember the Rogers at all. Uh, Eighth place, the Aiellos maybe. This was like the father and son-in-law or something like that team. They had a few funny moments, but not enough to really bring them up to be that good of a team. Seventh, the Schroeders. Don't remember much about them at all, except for that they fought a lot. They were kind of like a troubled team. So, yeah, they were fine. I honestly don't remember them though. And then sixth place, the Gaggins, underdog teams with some kids that made it a long way into the race. So that was pretty cool to see. They could have been even better if they made it farther, but they were definitely an interesting team. Fifth place, tied for favorite team of the season, the Paolos. They were really enjoyable. They fought so much, like the Italian mom and all that. Oh, it's crazy stuff going on there. So they're a clear part of the storyline, and also some funny jokes from that team. yeah, a really good team considering that they were a family. So I'll just say that much. And then fourth place, the Godlewskis, otherwise known as the Desperate Housewives. Yes, that's a pretty enjoyable nickname. And yeah, they were pretty fun. I mean, they weren't the best team of the season, but they were more enjoyable to watch than others and kind of a mess. So yeah, they were definitely fun to watch. And then another favorite season team of the season, the Weavers, and they were depicted by the other teams of the villains. They didn't even really do anything that bad, so they're not really the villains, but they're the most important team of this season, so in that aspect they are. The main thing about the Weavers that I found, it's so bad, but it's also funny, is that their dad or whatever had passed away. Uh, I think he got run over by a car or some accident like that, and they like repeatedly encounter like cars running away and racetracks during the race. So that was oddly coincidental and definitely made the season a little more interesting. That's what I'll say. Second and first place teams, not the best. The Branson's second place team, really just not an interesting team. Didn't do enough to be recognizable. And then the Lynxids kind of served as the villains. They were going against the Weavers in many ways. And they were just like, it's like unfair because they're just these strong, athletic, 20-year-olds that kind of beat everyone else. So, in that way, not a great season, but some drama and some story more than a lot of other seasons. So, that's the only saving grace of season 8. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It was fine, but I prefer the regular format, of course. Okay, season 9, a good season. Route was pretty good. We went to Brazil, Germany, Russia, Italy, Greece, Oman, Australia, Thailand, Japan. So some of the staple countries on the race, and then some added countries like Greece and Oman that really add a lot to this season. I can remember specifically them going to Greece and some cool places in there. So definitely a pretty good route. Just going down. First team out, John and Scott. Not memorable at all. Lisa and Joni, the siblings in 10th place, had some pretty funny moments and just a lot of energy, fighting and screaming. So that was definitely enjoyable to see. A pretty good team considering they were eliminated so early. Wanda and Desiree, parent child team, pretty irrelevant in 9th place. 8th place, Danielle and Danny. The flirts they flirted with Eric and Jeremy. It was really the other way around. It really was. But that was obviously a main dynamic of the season. And while that wasn't my favorite ever, it was definitely provided some interest. And they're not my favorite team ever, but they at least provided some of that storyline in the season. 7th place, Dave and Lori, a really sweet couple, and would have been cool to see them make it a little farther. As far as like the feel good couples, they definitely provided more entertainment than others, and were a pretty easy team to root for. And then in 6th place, we have Lake and Michelle. They were definitely a troubled couple. The Lake Southern accent, so recognizable, and definitely boosted the team in my rankings. They were fun to watch. 5th place team, another older couple here, Fran and Barry. They were not nearly as interesting as Meredith and Gretchen, but they were a strong underdog team that made it a good ways and were definitely enjoyable to watch, and you definitely wanted to cheer for them. So pretty good team there. 4th place, Joseph and Monica. They fought a little bit. They were definitely a troubled couple, and that boosted them on my rankings, but not as good as Fran and Barry or Lake and Michelle, in my opinion. 3rd place, Ray and Yolanda, troubled couple, but their fights weren't interesting and they just didn't add too much. They're kind of like the odd team out in the finale, so I don't know. I don't like them that much. And then second, Eric and Jeremy. I know a lot of people. Some people hate them. I think there were times where they were genuinely funny, and the rivalry between the frats and the hippies. They're of course the frats, and then the winners are the hippies. I think that rivalry is of course what makes this season. So I have to give them credit. They might you definitely don't want to cheer for them, um, but they had some really funny moments. And the winners of this season, another satisfying winner team in BJ and Tyler. Um, yeah, they were the hippies, that's kind of what they were billed as, and they were jokesters, and they were just fun to watch. So, um, a great season, yeah, a really solid season in season 9. I wouldn't quite call it an iconic season, but a really good season. I give it an 8 out of 10. Moving on to season 10, the last season before the All Star season, we have one of the best routes in history, probably second only to season 5. We go to China, Vietnam, Mongolia, that's really cool, Kuwait, India, Mauritius, Madagascar, Finland, Morocco, Ukraine, and Spain. So just such a diverse route as far as the countries visited, some new countries for the race, and a really cool backdrop for the action that happened in this season. First team, 3 teams eliminated were 3 of the most irrelevant teams in history. 12th, Bilal and Saeed were eliminated like in the middle of a leg almost, I think, from what I can remember. 11th, Vipul and Ardi, and 10th, Kelly and Jamie. Just don't remember anything about them at all, and quite irrelevant teams. Ninth place, Duke and Lauren, parent child. Again, a pretty irrelevant team. And then eighth place, Tom and Terry. They were definitely involved in the alliance, the Six Pack Alliance, so they were known for that, but other than that, didn't provide much. Seventh, Peter and Sarah, another member of the alliance. I think they're involved in that. I can't remember, but they're fine, but nothing too interesting from them. Sixth, we have David and Mary in a iconic team, kind of the orchestrator of this whole Six Pack Alliance that was really fun to watch throughout the season and provided a really good story dynamic for the season. The Southern accent, just iconic, especially Mary's Southern accent. And I know it's weird to like teams just because of their accents, but it does kind of create a bigger personality. And yeah, they were definitely fun to watch and played a major role in the season. Fifth place, Irwin and Godwin, siblings, members of the Six Pack Alliance. They were fun, but they were really just a part of the alliance in the end. They didn't have too much role in the story. Dustin and Candace, um, the Blondes, just amazing team, so competitive, the most competitive female team of all time, probably even if they were eliminated in fourth, and my personal favorite of this season. This season revolves around them at the end of the day, and even though they didn't make it into the final 3, they played such a big role, and just between U-turns and all kinds of stuff, they were really fun to watch and provided kind of a center for this season. Third place, Lynn and Carlin. They had some funny moments and were member to the alliance, so they were a pretty enjoyable team. Rob and Kimberly, troubled couple. They had some good fights. Not They were almost an iconic team, but they're not, as crazy fights as some of the other troubled couples, but they were definitely fun to watch. They made it to second. And then the winners of this season, quite uninteresting. Tyler and James, they just didn't contribute much at all. Like, kind of like a Robin Brennan type victory. The all male team just not being that big of a part of the season and not a memorable personality. So, season 10, I give it the edge to season 9. I think I prefer the Six Pack Alliance to the Hippies versus the Frats as our central storyline. And I do think there's some fantastic teams in this season, and the route is absolutely amazing. So, those are the first original 10 of the season. Now we get to see what they all culminate in season 11, the first All Stars of the race. And before I get into the route, I'm going to talk about what teams were picked. We have Sharla and Mirna. Mirna and Smirna, Sharla and Mirna, whatever you want to call them, their joke name or their real name. But they were selected, and that is obviously a fantastic casting decision, considering that they were one of the most iconic teams of all time and just played such a big role in season 5. Oswald and Danny, as I already talked about, they were great in season 2. Great reason to bring them back here in season 11. Dustin and Candace just talked about how competitive they were, how big of a part they played in season 10. They were brought back here. Same thing with Rob and Amber, just the villains of season 7, and had such a big target on their backs and came with that target to season 11. Great casting there. The Guidos, villains of season 1, great team, competitive, came back. Another great casting decision there. Terry and Ian talked about how they were so great in season 2 as villains, but also underdogs. Another great casting decision. David and Mary, they were pretty enjoyable in season 10, and while there might have been some other teams more interesting than them to bring back, they definitely belong in this All Star season. Uchan and Joyce, very interesting. I don't think any other team has won the race and came back for a second time, and that's what they did. So that was an interesting casting decision to let a winning team come back. I think it would have been a little more interesting if they had let another winning team come back. And of course, I would love to see an all winners season. Maybe some of the most iconic winning teams that were a satisfying result to the season to come back. But it was definitely cool to have them, and I enjoyed them in their victory in season 7. Kevin and Drew, the New Yorkers, talked about how they were so great in season 1, and then these last two just don't do it for me. John, Vito, and Jill, I talked about in season 3 how they're a little part of the alliance, and they were kind of a feel good couple, but they weren't that interesting, but they were brought back here for the All Stars. I mean, I could have picked 10 other teams. I know, I think Christy from Colin and Christy was pregnant during this, so they couldn't do that. If they had found a way to get Colin and Christy on this season, I'll go more into that a little later. But so yeah, that's not a great casting decision. And then Eric and Danielle to combine, them was definitely a bold choice, and just the frats were a fine team, and they had a great dynamic with the hippies versus the frats, but not my favorite team. And then you're gonna dilute them by putting them together. Not a great casting. So 9 of 11 teams were really good, like amazing decisions. 2 were missed. So overall, I'm not going to complain too much about casting because they did an amazing job to get so many iconic teams on the same stage. That being said, it is an absolute travesty that we never got to see Rob and Amber face off against Colin and Christy, the two most dynamic villain teams of all time, 2 of the most intense competitive racing teams of all time, and we never got to see them go against each other. That really is painful in my opinion, and I'm really sad we never got to see them go against each other. So I know they couldn't change that, but I wish they had found a way to make that happen in the future. So now, going through the country, it's not a bad route. We go to Ecuador, Argentina, Chile, Mozambique, Tanzania, Malaysia, Poland, China, Guam. So some pretty cool locations, and especially considering this is the season where the cast is going to be the best, and to have a route that's not bad is definitely a major plus to this season. Just going through the boot order, I talked about how John, Vito, and Jill were uninteresting, where they were the first team eliminated. So I always want the uninteresting teams to be eliminated, and that happened here. So that was definitely a satisfying elimination. 10th place, Kevin and Drew, they seemed a little lazy. They seemed like they didn't want to be there, and they got eliminated. So it's a little funny to see their laziness. Obviously, they're fantastic, and with all of these teams, you want to see more of them. But wasn't sad to see them go in 10th, and they didn't do all that much this season. In ninth place, David and Mary. They were pretty enjoyable. I had some feuds with Charla and Mirna and that kind of stuff. So they were pretty memorable in this season. Not iconic, but they earned their status from the last season, and they were eliminated in ninth. And then one, probably the most shocking elimination in race history, Robin Amber falling at 8th place in just not making it far at all. 8th place, they were primed early on as the villains, and even though they're barely in the race for only 3 or 4 legs, they are still very highly rated. They earned a 107 on my rating, and they just were a great villain team in the early part of the race and had this giant target on their backs. And it's so cool to see how big of a role they played in this All-Star season in such a short amount of time. And then 7th place, Terry and Ian. They weren't as enjoyable as in season 3 for sure. They still had some fun moments and were a pretty good team to watch. The Guidos, kind of similar story with them. They fell to 6th place, and they had some like airport drama with like getting caught behind. The amount of airport drama this season just absolutely ridiculous. And what makes it so good, it's not one thing that happens at the airport, it's the whole season with drama at the airports. So that was really cool to see. Then moving into 5th place, Uchan and Joyce, the former winners, couldn't quite make it all the way. They made it pretty far to 5th, but they could not make it all the way. Didn't get to see too much from them. They didn't have like the same storyline that they had the past season, and just not that interesting in this season. And then moving to 4th place, Oswald and Danny were fantastic in this season. They were so good in season 2. They're even better in this one. Eliminated 4th just like season 2, but they were some fantastic quotes from them, like, "When I'm over, I'm gonna kill this taxi driver," or something like that. It was pretty. I think I've posted the clip before, but it's pretty funny, and I definitely remember that from them. And they were just fantastic in this season. So, so good. One of the best teams of all time. 3rd place, same story, Charlotte and Mirna. Mirna, same. She didn't change from season 5. She's still fighting you at the airport and just getting her way onto some fast flight. Charlotte's running around like crazy. Such a good team. I would say, obviously they made it a little farther. They were not expected to make it this far at all. An awesome underdog story, and just as good as they were in season 5 for sure. Just really fun to watch, and they made it all the way to 3rd. 2nd place, Dustin and Candace. They were once again really strong this season. Really fun to watch. Maybe a few less points than season 10 just because they weren't quite as much a part of the drama, but they were still a really strong team with a target on their back and made it all the way to 2nd, but couldn't quite pull it off. So far this season's been fantastic, but unfortunately Eric and Danielle did win. They're kind of villains of this season because you don't want them to win. They're a hybrid team. They weren't that fun in season 9, and they did win. And they're the villains, and they fought with each other a little bit, and they just were not a good. They're like Freddie and Kendra for worst teams to win it because I mean, they were definitely not expected to win, but they weren't an underdog. They're like an athletic couple. They're not going to be an underdog. So, very disappointing to see them win it. They're one of the worst teams of the season, and they end up winning it. If you take them out and replace them with some good team from another season. I think this could be the best season of all time, but they kind of ruined the story of this season, and so I give it a 9 out of 10. It's almost perfect, but it's not quite there because of who wins it. Favorite teams, Ozzy and Danny, Charlotte and Mirna, Dustin and Candace from season 11. Um, really good stuff for the first All-Star season. And so having a look at my rankings for these first 11 seasons, season 5, it's unbeatable. It had such a good cast, really good route, and the best story of any season by far. Just so good there with season 5. Season 7 is not a close second, but it's pretty close. This is not far. Another great season. I've already talked about it. Season 11 doesn't quite beat season 7, but it's really close. So cool to see iconic teams racing alongside each other, bickering, fighting for planes. Really cool. Just, not as perfect as it could have been. And then season 3 is right there too, with a great final 3, despite some less interesting early boots. So those 4 kind of like in a tier on their own. Right below them in the next 2, it's season 2, which had some really great moments. Just was early on in the race history and wasn't quite as story focused. And then season 1, same story there. Really great teams, but some odd quirks of being an early season. And then seasons 10 and 9, which had overall good storylines and good teams, but also a few less interesting teams. And then the tier below, season 6, as I talked about, some incredible moments in there, but also some really weird, bad stuff happening. And then season 4, just kind of a less interesting, despite having a pretty good storyline. And then at the bottom, season 8. I know some people hate season 8, some people don't want to put it at the bottom. I will give it the benefit of the doubt that it has like a really good storyline, but the format just can't really allow it to be properly compared with the regular race where you have two people opposed to 4. So those are my rankings for the original seasons 11, seasons 1 to 11. My top 5 favorite teams, including the All Star, we have Charlotte and Mirna from 5 and 11. Colin and Christy from 5, Rob and Amber from 7 and 11, Ozzy and Danny from 2 and 11, and Meredith and Gretchen from 7. So yeah, I don't think these teams are going to get beaten by any of the later teams for personality, because these were just crazy personalities and so fun to watch. So I'll be probably back in a week or 2, maybe longer, I don't know, with the next block of seasons from 12 to 18 preview. Not quite as good as this, but still really good. So I will be back with that soon. Just looking at how I'm going to block these seasons together. We did 1 and 11 today. Now we're gonna look at 12 and 18, 12 to 18, 19 to 24, 25 to 31, and 32 to whenever they decide to do another All-Star season. Who knows when that happens? They might save it for 40. We'll see. So that's gonna do it for this video on seasons 1 to 11. And this is the Amazing Race Recap, signing out.